a bunch of different things that several people have heard me talk about already, but I'll start off with what the topic was, which is like attitude and personality in your sculpts. So pretty much when you're working on something, my whole attitude is just, I brought these two as an example. Like if you're going to work on something and sculpt something, to me there's no sense in like, if you were doing like a werewolf bust, just to, a lot of people, they get focused on what the, like what makes up a werewolf, so big teeth and the sound, stuff like that, making it look like a wolf, but they don't really add anything to it in terms of like, again, the personality, the attitude. And so, I mean, I easily could have made this one where it was, you know, he's just kind of looking straight ahead, and, you know, people would have, you know, liked it, they would have bought it just because it's a werewolf, you collect werewolves. But my whole thing was, you know, give them something. I'm always, with every one of my sculpts, I'm always thinking like, what are they feeling at the time? So it's always, you know, are they afraid of something? Are they angry at something? Are they chasing something? Are they running from something? So, and so much of it comes in the eyes. And I taught a class on Friday, and a big part of the class on Friday was when I was showing people doing eyes. The eyes convey so much of your sculpt. And the eyes really, it's pretty simple in terms of if you want to get like a lot of great emotion out of your sculpts. And you think about it in just this way. You think about eyeball, eyelids, and then eyebrow. So once you get the eyeball in, anytime you're making your sculpt, always, a lot of people make it like an oval or they make like an egg shape or something. Don't do that. You start off with a circle. Just start off with a sphere, because that's what an eyeball looks like on the inside. Get it in there, and then you're going to add your eyelid and your upper and lower eyelids. And that right there is going to, basically wherever you place those, if you place the upper eyelid further down and flat, your character is going to look kind of tired. If you place the lower eyelid further up and raise your upper eyelid, you're going to give them a surprised look. But it's, don't just make it like nothing. You know, you want to do something with it, like squint them, put them closer together, make them squinty. So you're going to make your character look more evil. He's going to look like he's like, you know, staring at something or looking. So really play with that. And then the eyebrow, really focus on that too, because you're going to, you know, wherever that place is, it's going to be surprised if it's up here. If you bring it down, especially closer to the nose, it's going to give you like a really good evil look or something mad. So these right here is, you know, just this area alone can make or break a sculpt. So something that has just dead eyes, you look at the sculpt and it just, that's what kind of makes it like, it takes it from, oh, that's really cool. And it's all because just the emotion of the piece, like how you're, you know, what that character is experiencing. So you want your sculpts to kind of tell a story. So again, with the werewolf, you know, he's not in a relaxed position. He's, you know, either turning his head and he's growling or something like that, but you kind of get the feel of what's going on. Same thing with Bizarro here. I mean, you know, once again, you could do just a straight museum pose. I find that incredibly boring. That doesn't do anything for me. It's like, why not do them where, you know, they've got some sort of like real feeling and emotion going on. And so almost all of my sculpts, you'll see that. Now, some of the mini busts I've got on my table, you'll see that they're just straight ahead. But I was really, when I started the line, I was going for kind of a real traditional, like what you would see in a museum of like old school busts. And I was just trying to do like my own little version of all these characters without like really looking at reference. When I did the Hulk, I didn't have to look at a picture of the Hulk. I knew kind of like what he is as a brute, and I've done him so many times. But a couple of the pieces, I've started like putting a little bit more, because I can't help myself. It's hard for me just to do straight emotion. So Green Goblin and like the Abomination that I've done, they've got more of like a grin and stuff, because I just want to get that feeling across them. If they're just sitting there, it just doesn't convey their personality. So, you know, so things like that, I would always say, just try to, when you're sculpting something, whatever it is, just throw in just a little bit of like, you know, like a head turn, kind of twist the neck a little bit, make it look up. Just think of, what is this character doing right at that second? What is he doing at that minute? What's happening? So, you know, and that's going to help your sculpts like so much. So doing that little bit of like twist, turns, lifting, or with the eyes are going to convey a lot too. The last thing is just like with your mouth, that's the other thing that's going to like help. So if you nail a face, and I know a lot of you've probably seen pieces that are over there, or you've seen pieces online that it could be the body's just awesome, you know, the whole piece is awesome, and then it just, as soon as you get to the head, it loses it. You know, it's just like, you see it, you're just like, ugh. You're like, it's just a terrible face. That is it. For me, everything down here could almost be not incidental, but it's just not as important as if you don't nail the face. And so that's where all of your emotion and personality is going to come from. So you really focus on that. And the best way to, if you're kind of struggling with faces, and John that I've been talking with is a great sculptor, but he really wants to work on his faces more, and especially like female faces. So real human faces, if you're doing your own fantasy characters, there's a lot more leeway. Nobody's going to tell you that your dragon or your ogre or something doesn't look right because it's your own creation. But if you're doing a human face, male or female, you know, people could say that doesn't look like a person, you know, or, you know, that really your eyebrows look wrong or something like that. So human faces obviously are just the hardest to get, and a lot of people will avoid them because they're hard. When I've got something that's really difficult to do, whatever it is, when I was having a hard time with hands early on and stuff, that's all I did. Just you plug into that and you do that a lot. So if you're having trouble with faces, then I told John, I said, you need to do 50, 100 faces. If you want to get good at female faces, it is all about repetition. It's all about doing it over and over and over, and you just keep doing it, and you don't try to focus on making that one female face good. Because, like, John, when you were working on your, like Barry over there, how long did you work on that face?
Quite a few hours.
Like, I mean, so probably, yeah, you probably like just focused and like worked and worked and worked, and in the end, you probably weren't fully satisfied with it. I mean, you know, and he's better off than if he would have just like spent like a couple hours on a female face looking at reference. Like, don't try to do it out of your head, especially humans. Like, if you're doing, once again, you're doing fantasy or something, you can just kind of have fun and create it. My minibus, I didn't look at a ton of reference. I just knew what the thing in the Hulk looked like. But if I'm doing a person's face, if I'm doing a real legitimate like portrait, I've got a lot of female reference up, and I'm looking at all the different things that would make like a good female face. So you sit there for like just a couple hours, you work on it, you get your proportions right, and then you stop and you put it aside and you do another one, you do another one. I told him, I said, do a female face every week. I said, and in 6 months, you will be amazed by how good your female faces are. But you've got to be like really committed. You've got to be that dedicated to like put in that time for whatever it is that you're having a difficult time with. You know, and again, and for those, if you're doing those and you're just trying to get the anatomy correct and stuff like that, and it's just more for you to kind of practice, you don't have to throw in the emotion and personality with that, because that's more about getting just correct proportions. It's more when you move on to your final sculpt. So you've got your female faces down and stuff like that, you're feeling good about it. Now you want to do your jungle girl piece. That's the one where instead of just making her just standing there, you know, twist the body around. And we were also talking about, like last night, we were talking about when you're doing something like that, don't be afraid to get in the pose yourself. So I was telling them last night that if I die, I'm not really worried about people finding anything bad on my computer or anything like that. What I'm worried about them finding is all of my reference folders of me like this, and me like this, and me like doing this. I mean, so I've got hundreds of pictures of me, and what I'll do is I will call my kids in, and I'll give them the phone, and I'll be like, okay, I'll be like, take picture, take picture, take picture, and I'll have them do like all the way around, and I'll do like full 360, and I'll be like, thank you, and they'll just roll their eyes, and they'll hand me the phone back, and then I'll go on Photoshop, and I'll print off a whole sheet of like me in the 360, and I'll put that up. And so like for Bizarro, I mean, that's exactly what I did. I was in this pose, like basically doing this, and so when I'm working on them, I'm not just trying to guess. You know, a lot of times you just get in that mode where you're thinking like, I know what people look like, I know what a body looks like. Don't do that. Even the pros don't do that. You know, it's sort of like, you know, don't be afraid to use reference. Reference is awesome. And the more you do it now, you know, I can do a body like this without looking at reference, but it's only because I've been doing it for 15 years, you know? So, I mean, and I've been doing it a lot. I mean, I do that thing where every week I am sculpting. I mean, I finish in a week, like anywhere from like, if they're small, I can finish like maybe 4 like head sculpts or little mini busts, up to like at least a statue a week. I mean, I'm finishing at least 1 statue every single week, and I've been doing that for 15 years. I mean, you know, so you got a picture, like, that is what it takes to really improve. If you're sitting there spending a lot of time on 1 sculpt and you're going like beyond a week for 1 sculpt, unless it's something really big, but if it's small, you need to stop doing that. That is not going to help you become a better sculptor. It's not going to help you become a better artist. You got to learn how to blow past that and not be precious with it. This is not the final level that I will get to with sculpting. This is not my masterpiece. Nothing that you're doing is your masterpiece. It's only what you're working on right now, and you get it as good as you can, and you set a time limit for yourself. So I was telling the guys again, we had a long talk, so you're gonna hear a lot about what we talked about last time. I was telling them again that my deadlines come from clients. So if I set up a job with a client and I tell them that we agree that it's going to be done in October, that's my deadline. I know that I've got till October. If you've got like a regular job, a full-time job or something like that, and you're trying to sculpt on the side, then you don't have that. It's really easy to push your dates off and not get things done. So you have to set your own goals, and you have to kind of tell yourself, okay, I'm starting on this little, you know, head sculpt of something, and it's, you know, let's just say it's Monday. You tell yourself, by Sunday, I don't care how far it is, I don't care if I'm only partially done, it's going in the oven, I'm baking it, and so even when it hits like Sunday 11:59 and you're panicking, once it hits 12, you're like done, however it is. And so one of the things that I would tell all the new people who are here is that I have a Patreon going on with my partner Gannon, and our Patreon account, if you sign up for it, it's $25 a month, but if you sign up for the show, it's only $10. But $25 a month, it gives you access to our forum. And our forum has all these different exercises. I've got like 14 hours worth of tutorials on there, showing all my sculpting techniques for like everything, how to make tools, how to just, you know. But one of the biggest benefits is that we do a sculpting jam every other week. So we do, 1 week Gannon will do an illustration jam, and the next week I will do a sculpting jam. And basically we get online, we do a video chat meetup. So all the members get online, and we all see each other, we talk to each other, and then for that 1 hour, it's usually like 9 o'clock. I will say, okay, here's the topic. So like one time it was, the topic was reptile cowboy. And that's what it was. And it was your version of a reptile cowboy, whatever it is. And you've got 1 hour to do it. And so what that does is, the whole reason for that is, I'm trying to get people into the mode of, don't be, you can't sit there and be like, okay, perfect. Like nobody moves like this. Everybody moves like this. And like and you can see that clock ticking down. And I'll say, as we're talking, and we're talking about movies, we're talking about comic books, talking about like any nerdy thing you could think of. And just having a good time, but I'll just say 30 minutes, you know, 20 minutes, you know, it's counting down, and people are like, oh, and you know, and half the people are saying like, oh, this looks terrible. And my whole thing is, don't worry about it. It's not important. It's not about the end result. You're not going to, in an hour, show me something that I'm going to be like, wow, you should mold and cast that and sell it. You're the new, you know, it's not about it. You're not going to blow me away. Well, in terms of like the quality of the sculpt, what's going to like blow me away is like, how good did you do the concept? You just got it done quickly. You threw the eyeballs in there. You gave it some personality. You made it look like something fun, and it makes you think, okay, I can actually get through most of a sculpt in an hour. And once you kind of realize that, you start realizing like, wow, like this doesn't take as long as I thought. I don't have to sit there on a sculpt for like a week and just painstakingly look at it and be like, it's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. Like I said, so we do the jam, and at the end of the jam, I just say, time's up, everybody show it. And everybody just shows their thing online, and we all kind of laugh at each other's. And there are students who, as we're doing this, I'm the one who comes up with the topic. And there are times when, as I start sculpting, it's just not working. And I'm just like, oh, and I'm the one saying, this looks like crap. I'm like, I'm not happy with this. And the students who are part of it, there have been jams where their pieces are much better than mine. Like legitimately, I'm like, wow. I'm like, you just ran, like you did something awesome there. And then we take pictures and we post them on the forum. And then some people will take them and finish them. Some people will just like recycle the clay because they've got the pictures. Now my buddy Gannon, he's an illustrator. And he teaches how to do like comic books. He teaches how to do like, you know, just get your like perspective much better and stuff like that. It's like breaking through some of those, you know, basic foundation things that a lot of people don't quite get. He really is not a sculptor, but he started coming in on the jams and stuff like that. We've known each other since high school, but like I said, and he's played with clay, but he's probably at the level that some of you are at, where he's never really done anything. Well, the first jam was Frankenstein. And it wasn't the universal, it was whatever you see in your head as Frankenstein. And I told everybody, you can't look up reference. I said, Frankenstein, in your head, just go and do your own version. The next one was werewolf, and it was just, you know, whatever you see in your head as a werewolf. So Gannon did some pieces, and when he showed them online, if any of you sign up and you go to the jams, you see the first two jams, you can see Gannon's 2 entries, and they look very rough. They look very simplistic and they're not well done. It's just, but he got them done. You can tell that it is a Frankenstein. You can tell that it is a werewolf, and that was the whole point. So he put it up on his shelf, and which I encouraged him to. I said, put it on the shelf, and every now and then you might come back to it. And if you want to try to finish it, I'm going to keep walking you through so that you can get this done. So he put it up there, and he put it up there, and worked through some others, and he would bring it down and ask me questions. How do I do the hair? How do I smooth it out? Stuff like that. And I would help him. And so eventually, he finally finished it. And he did the thing where he said, he said to me, I know I could go further with this. He said, I know I can go further with this, but like it's done now. So he finally finished like his Frankenstein, and like with like the hair and stuff like that, like, you know, I showed him how to do all of that. And so that was basically like the first thing he sculpted in just, I don't know, years. And he said, like here, he said, I could have done more with this, you know, I could have done more with this, I could have added more texture, but he was real happy with, you know, the fact that he got done. And then his werewolf, the second piece, he finished up his werewolf. There you go. And so, I mean, and again, I helped him with how to do the hair, how to put the teeth in, you know. Gannon's got, you know, he's got a pretty good understanding of anatomy from drawing, so he was able to kind of, you know, he's able to put the anatomy together. But like, it's very smooth. Like, I told him, I said, next time, you know, I'll show you how to do like really short hair for like, you know, for the rest of the body. But we weren't going to stop at this point. He said, I'm going to do more werewolves. He goes, so I'm not going to try to make this one perfect. You know, but when he got to the teeth, he had a lot of questions with the teeth. He didn't know exactly how to do those, and I showed him how. But these are the kind of things that, like, you know, he's a beginner. He's a beginner, and this is like the stage that he got to. So most of our people on the forum are at this stage, and it's all about what you put into it. So if you are only sculpting like 1 or 2 times a month, then you may progress, but it's going to be really slow. You're not going to see a lot of difference between month 1 and month 9. But if you're doing what I said and you're making yourself sculpt something like every week and just finish something, whatever it is, in 6 months, you're going to see progression. And you can see it on our jams that pick any of the people who have joined in and look at the first jam, Frankenstein, and then look at our last jam. And I can't remember what it was, but we've done like almost 20 of them now. And you will see how much they've progressed in just doing a 1-hour sculpt. So, like I said, it's just one of those things where when people come up to me and they say, and I get it through the whole weekend, I've had tons of people come up to me and go like, I'm not good. I love this stuff. I paint, but you know, I can't sculpt. I can't draw or anything like that. Or you know, I tried playing with some clay and stuff like that. It's kind of the equivalent of, and I use this example twice. To me, it's kind of the example of if I give you a hammer and I give you a whole big bag of nails and a big pile of wood, and that's all I kind of told you, and you knew that people built houses with nails and wood and hammers, and then you went over and you tried to build a house, and your house just sucked like where you are right now, you would be like, oh, I can't build houses. I don't know how to build houses. Now, if a carpenter came and said, like, let me show you how to make a house, and then he kind of showed you the proper way to like make a structure for a house, you'd be like, oh, you'd be like, okay, now I know what to do. It's the same thing with this. If you've ever tried sculpting and you can't really do it, it's probably just because you've gotten confused, you've gotten overwhelmed, you've never had a good instructor or something like that. My favorite thing in the world is I would much rather talk with somebody who's just getting started, or kids, or I do love doing like career day. And when I go to career day, I just talk to all the kids, and I'm like, they get into this stuff, but I like talking with people who want to get started, but just have never really got started. I'll talk to them over like a pro about finishing techniques and stuff like that, like any day. I like getting people to where they kind of get over that hump and they're sort of like, oh, like this isn't like that hard. And it's like, no, it's not. It's like, you just got to jump in and you just got to learn how to get over the humps that have kept you back or kept you from like really delving in, and get rid of the whole attitude of, I can't do this. You can totally do this. Now your skill level, you can't finish a piece and then compare it to mine or compare it to a lot of other people's out there. Again, compare yours to mine after you've done it for 15 years, at least a sculpt every single week for 15 years, then go ahead and put yours up to mine. But by that point, I'm going to be like 30 years in, and now you've got to compare your 15-year sculpt to my 30 years of experience. So it doesn't help to compare to other people. Just be happy with whatever you finish, and just keep going. Don't get dissatisfied because it's not coming out perfect, because that's going to come with the practice. And the other thing that I was just going to say is that it's really important, and I always tell people, is that a lot of times people will start sculpting and they'll start working on something, if they're working on eyes, and they've gone out and they've gotten a little tool set and they've gotten some clay and stuff like that, and they're working on a face, and the eyes are just not coming out right, and they're just like, oh, and their mindset is, I can't do faces, I can't do eyes, I can't just, I just can't do it. That's the one thing that eludes me, is this. And this is where I go back to the house example, is that I give the example of, if I gave you a kid's plastic hammer and I told you to go build a house, and you would hit the nails and it would beep, 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 squeak, and you'd be like, oh, I can't build houses, I suck at building houses. My attitude would be like, okay, try this, and I would give you a carpenter's hammer and you go boom, and you go like, oh my God, that's so much better, I can actually put nails in. Same thing with this. It's not, half the time it's not even so much about the technique, it's about the tools. And so I show everybody like how to make your own tools. Very, very easy. I use just cheap wood. I will buy tool, like for the class I did on Friday, I had Rob buy everybody in the class cheap kits that were just the really cheap wood kits that cost like $6 or $7 for a bunch of wood tools. All those tools in there are just crap tools. I hate them. But the wood is good, and that's what we use. And I brought my Dremel in, and during the class, I would have people bring me up one of their tools, and I would Dremel it down into the shape that like is gonna really help you, and I would sand it, and I would say, okay, there, it's that smooth. I'm always on the lookout for like good hard wood. One of the things I like to use is bamboo. One of my neighbors has like a bamboo forest in the backyard. I chopped down some bamboo, and for the class I taught at Wonderfest, I made everybody bamboo tools, and they're awesome. They're hard, they're nice and smooth, they're really, really good. So hardwood is the key. Once you get the hardwood, it's just a matter of dremeling, sanding, smoothing it down, and you make your own tool set. I haven't bought my own tools for 10, 15 years, like minimum. Like everything I make is all my own, and it's all cheap, it's inexpensive, but you get the right one. So now you'll sit there and you can't do this, and you say like, if I'm working on something and it's not going right, and let's just say it's an eye that I'm working on, and I'll say like, okay, I just can't get this. I'll basically put it down and I'll spend 1 hour making new tools, and I'll come up with 3 new tools, and then I'll get my new tool and I'll be like, ah, there we go. And now all of a sudden the eye is so much easier for me to make. So that's another big part of like what I show people, is building your own little tool set that's going to help you get over some of those humps that you know, I wouldn't try to sculpt in his eye with a spoon, you know, like a big spoon or like a big chunk of wood. It would be something small, it would be detailed, it would be the right shape and size. So, you know, these are all some of the things that people don't think about. And you get a lot of pro artists out there who will say things that bug me, like they'll say like, the tools don't matter, it's about the practice and the experience of it. And I'm like, that's completely wrong. The tools do matter. You really need a good tool set, you know, to get kind of a lot of the effects that you want to get. So, so those are some of like the crucial things. Oh, and then the last thing I like to show is for people who don't think that they can do it. I like to show that this is one of my very first sculpts. So this is where I started. Now, this would normally be the sculpt of like, you know, a third grader. This is a sculpt of like a 25, 26-year-old. Okay, this is like, I did this when I was like 25, 26, and I always show everybody the nice detail on the hand. So, you know, like, I mean, so, but at 25 or 26, this was one of my first sculpts, and I was super proud of this. So this is where I started. Now, if you've been to my table or you see Bazaar or something like that, like I went from this to Conan and the Gorilla, but it's not because I'm super talented, because I'm obviously not crazy talented sculpting. You know, I didn't come out just like with a phenomenal piece. I came out with this, and I practiced nonstop, and I just kept pushing myself, and I got to that point. Tried to make every sculpt better than the last one, and you know, and that's how you get from this to this. I mean, there's no magic button. It is just about, you know, put in the time. So, so all that being said, any questions? Anybody got anything they wanna ask? Anything you're? Wait, okay, wait, hold on. What's that?
I could have done that in third grade or now.
Yeah, see, that's you're wrong though. You're good, yeah, you're good though. Good. What?
The jams are any medium you want.
Oh yes, the jams. When we do the jams, I always encourage Sculpey because I started off when I first started up. So this is Sculpey, okay. But again, as a good example, so is Bizarro. So it's the medium. So again, I'll hear a lot of people. That's another thing is I'll hear people say like they hear other people talking about stuff and they'll say like, oh, Sculpey, you can't get really good detail in Sculpey or something like that. It's completely not true at all. Once again, it all goes to whose hands it's in. So I started with Sculpey, and then I started seeing some big name sculptors like Andy Bergholz and Ray Villafane and stuff like that. They were doing wax, so I switched over to wax many, many years ago. And I was like, oh, I want to get that detail, and I love that. It's just amazing. So I switched to wax, I learned wax, and I love wax. Wax is a lot of fun. I did like, his hands are in wax. And occasionally I'll still do things, you know, like in wax, because I do like, you know, the effects of it. But wax is very slow. It's a lot of scraping. It's, you know, it's a slow process. And then one of my other friends who works at Sideshow, Walter O'Neill, he sent me a little casting of a Jonah Hex head that he had done, and I got it, and it was the most detailed thing I'd like ever seen. It was just crazy detailed, and it was the same, a little bit smaller than the Bizarro head. And he told me, I said, you know, this is wax, right? He's like, no, it's Sculpey. And I was like, oh my God. And then you see like Mark Newman stuff, if any of you know Mark Newman and stuff. So he does everything in Sculpey. So it's like, I was like, you know what, forget it. I said, I like Sculpey more because Sculpey I can go a lot faster. Wax is very slow. Sculpey I can leave up on the shelf and it doesn't dry out. Like I can just leave it up there, and I've had pieces sitting on my shelf for over a year, close to 2 years, and I can still go back to them and work them until I'm ready to bake them. I like just, it's easy to work with, and then when I'm done, I can bake it and make it hard. So this piece I did in Monster Clay, and I like Monster Clay, but the bad thing about Monster Clay is this is the original prototype of Bizarro. I brought him to the show, not worried about anything really happening to him because he's solid and stuff like that. When I did this in Monster Clay, I couldn't bring the original to the show because Monster Clay is, you know, it's like a wax clay, but it never gets really hard. You can't bake it or anything. So it would just have been destroyed. So if I didn't have a casting of it, there's no way to like transport it. Now the advantage of Monster Clay is that you can melt, after you're done with the sculpt and you make a mold of it, and then you got a casting, you can melt it back down and reuse it as material. Sculpey, once you bake it, you know, that it's permanent, you're done. So I do like muscle clay, it's fun, but for most of my uses, I mean, Super Sculpey is really the way that I like to go. And then there's wax, and then there's like epoxy putty. I use like, for things that need a lot of strength, like his cape is epoxy putty, and it's really, really strong, and you know, I'll use that because you can really sand it super thin and it stays strong, so a lot stronger than Super Sculpey. So it just depends on the material, but you know, for the body, for the base, everything like that, I like to stick with Super Sculpey. When we're doing the jams, there's no set, you know, you don't have to have a specific armature, you don't have to have a specific type of material. We've had people, you know, who have worked in monster clay during the jam. We've had people who have, you know, just played with other types of materials. That doesn't matter. It's not really about the material. It's more about just getting in there and getting something done in an hour. And I don't care what you do it in. So,
What's the difference between Sculpey and Super Sculpey?
Okay, so Sculpey is the white stuff. It's like just white, and it's terrible, just horrible. Stay away from it. Don't use it for anything. It's
That's all
the
I have.
yeah. It's what?
That's all I have right now.
Okay, then all right. Use it up then, or use it just for your practice or whatever. But it's like it's the first version of Sculpey, and it's how much of it do you have?
Not much. I made a custom base for a piece I had a little left over.
You know what? It's perfect for things like bases and stuff. It's perfect for like if you want to use it for something like this, great. If you're starting to do your figure, super. You gotta just get away from that. Like, so the pink stuff, Super Sculpey, and then what I'll do a lot of times is so these are all the regular Super Sculpey. Super Sculpey like this has a slightly translucent quality. So when you're working, you might not see small imperfections in your sculpt. So what I do and a lot of other people will do is you'll get a block of firm gray Sculpey. Now the firm gray Sculpey, once again, people will say, oh, get the firm gray if you want to get good detail. Again, it's baloney. Most of my pieces, like all the detail, and if you come up and you look at the Bizarro and stuff, like his skin texture and stuff, it's done with the pink stuff. You can get just as good detail. It's just a little bit softer, but I like it because it's easier to work with. The gray firm, it's hard to work with. I mean, it will make your fingers like really work hard. And if you're trying to build up a form fast, it's just not good for that. I can crank out a form super fast with the pink stuff, but I'll mix in a little tiny bit, like almost like a sliver of the gray, just to get rid of the translucent quality. And so what you do is you take a little bit of the gray and you can mash it in. Sometimes I'll just use a rubber mallet and I'll pound it together, and then you use a pasta roller. Get yourself like a cheap pasta roller. And you roll it through until you can't see swirls in it anymore, until it's like kind of a gray color. Now, the way that I work so fast that, and on big stuff, that I don't really have a lot of time, most of the time, to do that. And I buy my Sculpey in 28-pound boxes. And like this past year, I mean, I think I bought in like 6 or 7 28-pound boxes of Super Sculpey because I blow through it. So I just go with the pink. I mean, but again, I've been doing this for a long time. So, you know, it's, you know, I don't quite need that. But starting off, you know, I would say get a block of the firm, and then if you go to, some of you might remember this from putting your phone or something, but Creative Wholesale. Creative Wholesale have the cheapest Super Sculpey like that you can buy. So it's if you go to the store to buy Super Sculpey, it could be like 12 to 15 bucks for a 1 pound block. If you go to Creative Wholesale, then it's like, I think a little less than $8 a block. So,
Have you ever tried the medium that they just came out with?
The medium gray. Yeah, I've got some. And again, it lasts me forever because I buy a 28-pound box of this and I buy a 1 pound block of the gray, and I've still got leftover gray because I do a slice, I mix it with a block, and again, but I don't always do it for some of the smaller things. Like if I'm doing a head sculpt, I might mix some of the gray in because it's a smaller head sculpt and I don't want to have any translucency. If I'm doing something like that big giant green Hulk that was in there, that was all pink Sculpey, you know. So it's not quite as important on that size. But Creative Wholesale, and the bigger the box you can get, if you can get yourself a nice size box, you'll need that because if you're going to be doing this every week, like I said, you're going to blow through a 1 pound box really, really fast. So it's worth it getting, they have 1 pound box, they have an 8-pound box, and then they have like a 28-pound box. And I'd say if you can, get the 8-pound box, and that'll last you for a while, and it's the cheapest way to go with in terms of buying your sculpting. So that's what I definitely say. But your white stuff, use it for bases, use it for like terrain, use it for a brick wall. But when it comes to like any type of figure, stay away from it because it's
Speaking of that Hulk, how do you approach capturing like a comic book artist's likeness when you're sculpting?
So you pull as much reference as you can from that artist. So that was Mike Deodato Jr. And so I found every picture of Hulk that he had done, and none of them match. Like none of his pictures. He does Hulk all different ways. So trying to find consistent looks was really, really difficult. And I was just going on, and I was just like, oh my God, nothing that he draws with the Hulk is the same. And so I found the one picture that I really wanted to base it on mostly. And it wasn't actually me, it was the client who first contacted me, said, I want a Mike Deodato Jr. So I started looking, and he left it up to me, the pose and everything like that. And so I found the one image, so I've gotten in my mind how I want his basic proportions. So I knew I wanted like just a big giant back and like a smaller head. And then I looked at, for his other pictures, even though the face and stuff and the body didn't look exactly the same, I got a sense of how he did his proportions. So I got a sense of, he always does a bigger torso, he always does like slightly bigger hands, stuff like that. So every artist kind of approached it differently. But then I just had up every reference that I could of Mike Deodato's art, so that I would pull little bits of his style into whatever part of the Hulk that I could, so that when somebody's looking at it as a whole, the overall bulk, you definitely see it, but then little bits like maybe the hands or the feet or something like that, you would still recognize as his style. So it kind of like, hopefully in the end, that's what it would come across as. And so, but lots of reference.
Do you completely do the sculpture then make it, or do you bake it after a certain timeline?
So I do both. So it really, so the nice thing about Super Sculpey, that the other thing that's really, really cool that a lot of people know is, in addition to getting Super Sculpey, you should get Liquid Sculpey. It comes in a little tube. And Liquid Sculpey, I usually take it comes in a little tube with a little nozzle. I usually get that and I'll squeeze it into like maybe a mason jar, seal it up, and I'll use a brush when I use it. And it looks like Elmer's glue, and it almost feels like Elmer's glue, but instead of being like sticky, it's more like smooth, And what that does is, you can bake your sculpt, and so Gannon had, I believe he had done that with this, I'm not sure. But sometimes what I'll do is I will make my figure like basically almost like they're naked with no clothes on. And I'll bake it, and then after I bake it, then I'll take the Liquid Sculpey and I'll brush it on and I'll add the clothes. And that way I'm not messing up anything underneath, and I've got my form, and the Liquid Sculpey helps the new Sculpey bond to it, and then you just put it back in the oven again and you bake it again, and you can keep doing that over and over and over and over. I've had sculpts where I've baked like multiple times. So as far as like my technique, I go different ways. Bizarro sculpted him all at once. Yep. So sculpted him all at one time. But if I'm doing a figure. If I'm doing a figure like maybe Clark Kent and he's wearing a suit, and I want the form underneath, but I need to make it like more like a suit jacket, not skin tight. Because when you're doing a skin tight figure, you're just basically sculpting a naked figure anyway, and you're just putting lines where their suit goes. But if you're doing Clark Kent, you're doing a big suit jacket, you still want the form. And a lot of times what will happen is if you're trying to sculpt straight with the jacket and stuff, you're going to squeeze in parts where it would go into his muscles, and you know that it's not going to look right. So get the form down, bake him, and then afterwards add the clothes. But the Liquid Sculpey is going to help it bond to it, so it's not going to ever slip. And as you're adding Sculpey on Sculpey, sometimes it has a tendency to kind of slip a little bit as you're working, and that really gives it just that little bit of grab so that it doesn't. So when I'm baking Sculpey, I bake between 250 and 275 degrees. I never go above 275 degrees. 9.9 times out of 10, it's always 250 degrees. And I let it cook in the oven, like most of my pieces. I'll leave it in there for like 4 hours, 6 hours, something like that, until it turns like even these are pretty light compared to what I normally get. I will get it a much darker orange than this. It'll start to almost turn brown. And then once it gets to that stage, I turn the oven off, just leave it in there and just let it cool. If you don't do that, then you'll, especially the thicker your piece is of Sculpey, I like to put a big, when I'm building up my figure, I'll build the armature so it's like a wire, like the skeleton, and then I'll wrap that in foil. And so with the foil, that's where I get most of my bulk. And it helps bake the sculpture from the inside out. If you don't do that and you use a ton of Sculpey, the thicker the Sculpey, the more likely it is going to crack in the oven. So you want to make sure that you don't use really, really thick Sculpey. Gannon's piece cracked a little bit, like in the center, you know, cracked a little bit in the back, like not major, but like that big giant Hulk that I did, his whole bulk of his chest is mostly Sculpey. So when you look at my statue before I add clay, it almost looks like a tinfoil statue, just made of tinfoil. And then I just start skinning it with Sculpey. And so if you're doing like a Superman figure or something like that, you don't have to do it for everything. So if it's skinny, if it's something like, I don't do foil like around by the wrist or like even mostly in the arms. I don't do a lot of foil because it's so small. If I add foil, by the time I add clay, it's just going to be too fat. It's going to look weird. So when you get skinnier parts like this, you're fine. Just use the armature wire, wrap it with some floral wire just to make sure the clay has something to grab onto, but you don't need to put like a lot of foil. But if it's a big area like a chest or something, you definitely want to bulk that out with foil. It'll bake from the inside, it won't crack, and like I said, it's just a much better way to go. So.
Approximately how long do you leave your oven on after, like, how long do you leave it in your oven after turning your oven off?
You can just kind of open it and see if it's cooled off, but once, so it depends on like how big the sculpture is. If it's something small, it cools off a lot faster. If it's something big, it retains heat, so it'll just take a lot longer. So you just got to kind of like turn it off and just forget it, and just every now and then come back and you can just kind of touch it, and if it's cool, you're good. You know, it's totally fine. I've heard people online and they say things like, you know, you should like boil your statues. Like some people will boil their Sculpey statues, and it'll bake that way. And they say like, yeah, you won't ever get cracked. It's all like there's all these fancy ways of doing it. You don't need to go any weird fancy way of doing it, like boiling it or like I've heard a million different ways. Just your regular oven, and I use my home oven. So I mean, in my studio, I've got a small oven in my studio, so it's away from the rest of the house. But when I've got a bigger statue, I bake it in my regular oven. And you smell a little bit of the Sculpey, but it's not toxic, it doesn't fill up the house, there's no smoke, and it doesn't leave anything. So we still cook our food in that oven too, it's just occasionally I'll put like a statue in there to cook. So, you know, so nobody has to worry about anything like that.
Another question or comment. I have a friend who either uses a heat gun or a hair dryer to like heat up smaller pieces. Have you ever tried that?
Exactly. So I do that a lot. So it depends. Like, so if I'm working on one small part, like I may sculpt like if I'm doing like a Superman head, I might do the head as a bald head and then bake it, let it bake all the way in the oven, and then I want to add the hair separately. Then what I might do is I might add the hair, and if it's a small part, if it's big, then I'll stick it back in the oven. But if it's just something small, then yeah, I'll hit it with a heat gun and just a regular like you see like the paint remover guns that you can get at Lowe's or Home Depot, and they've got two settings, high and low. Don't ever use high. High is like, you know, it's gonna like make your statue like turn black and blister and bubble and stuff like that. Just put it on low, and you just kind of sit there with it, and just kind of go over it and stuff, and go for a long time until you can start to see the color start to turn a little bit darker, and then it's baked, and you just, same thing, let it cool off. But I'll do it in parts like that, like quite often, that I'll add something just small, and I don't want to put the whole thing back in the oven, you know, so.
On the cape, you said you used epoxy putty on it. How do you do the form of that?
Okay. Capes are the worst thing in the world. I hate sculpting capes. I cannot stand sculpting capes. I despise sculpting capes. When somebody comes to me and they say, I want a Batman or a Superman, I go, don't you want a Hulk? Like, you know, like a Hulk or like, you know, like anything without capes. I cannot stand capes. Now capes, there are a million different techniques to using capes, to doing capes. one of the new, so it all depends on if you're doing a one-of-a-kind piece or you're doing a molding casting piece. This one, since we go molded and cast it, you have to make it thicker than you would normally make like a cape, because once you make the mold, if it's too thin, then when you pour the casting, parts that are too thin, they're gonna just basically disappear. So you're gonna have like maybe holes where you don't want. If it wasn't a Bizarro cape, if it was a real Superman cape, you would have holes in it like this where it's like very, very thin. So you have to make it extra thick. What it is man, it's a nightmare. I've done it so many different ways because I can't figure out a way that I enjoy. Sometimes I'll take clay and I'll like plastiline clay or something like that. I've got a bunch of it that doesn't ever get hard or something. You know, it's type you use like in art school or something. And I'll make almost like a slope off of his back right here, and then I'll lay a piece of, and I might like make like ridges inside of it and stuff like that. And here, I'll turn it around for the camera. So I might make like the like a pyramid shape, like from here going, or like a slope up his back with the plastiline that goes like all here, and then I'll scoop in some ridges to make it like, you know, the peaks and valleys of a cape, and then I'll roll out some magic sculpt and I'll lay it over the top of that. So I get my basic form and I roll it over his shoulders. And what you can do with that, like when I put it over his shoulders, is I'll either put, there's press and seal that you get like from the grocery store. Press and seal is like saran wrap, but it's like kind of sticky on one side a little bit. And it's great for, I use it for masking when you're doing like painting and stuff like that, but also for things like Sculpey, I'll lay it over his shoulders, and then when I lay the magic sculpt over and I take it off, I can just remove that and it'll form fit to his neck. The other thing that you could do is, if you're going to let it set overnight, is you could just take a lot of baby powder and just brush the shoulders with baby powder and brush a little bit of the magic sculpt with baby powder and then push it on, and the baby powder will keep it from sticking. So the next day you can just take it off and it won't stick. Once I've got that basic form, then it's just a nightmare scenario of I have to take this stupid flat cape that I've done and I have to roll out magic sculpt and lay it on, let it set, sand it, flip it over, lay more on, sand it, lay more on, sand it, build this up, sand it, and I keep going until I get like a nice shape like this. But this is just like not even hours, it's days and days of like sanding and magic sculpt. Now in the end I get a nice strong cape that, you know, looks good, but now that's for molding and casting. If you're doing a one-of-a-kind piece, there's this stuff called Warbler. And Warbler comes in sheets, and a lot of people use it for cosplay. And it's like big plastic sheets, and you can heat it up with a heat gun, and you can form it and shape it the way that you want, and like just form fit it right onto his shoulders, make the shapes the way you want, heat it up, keep forming it, and then it basically retains its shape, and it's really hard plastic. It's super cool stuff. But you can't really, the only way that you can mold and cast that is once you get your shape, then you have to kind of make it thicker again with magic sculpt. You have to go in and like thicken out your cape with magic sculpt. But if it's a one-of-a-kind, Warbler is really, really cool, really, really awesome. Mm-hmm.
They do have sculptable PLA filament for 3D printers now, and you could always have like a generic couple capes designed up, print it out, and then go over and do the like final touches with the sculpting afterwards. So you save like a lot of that build-up time.
So you're saying like you'd have
a PLA filament that with alcohol becomes like sculptable.
Okay.
So it's like there's the stepping from the printing, but you use like some denatured alcohol and you can start like smoothing it and
cool. That's cool. Yeah, I didn't know anything about that.
That would save you like 2 days of building
yeah,
up.
it saves me. Yeah, another reason I'm not doing client commissions anymore is because I don't want to ever sculpt capes ever again. You guys will rarely see me sculpt like a cape like in my future because they're just, oh, I hate them so much. I cannot tell you. And that's where, and I'm so tempted, capes, that's where my whole thing that I said in the very beginning about attitude and personality, that's where I'm so tempted to make just a boring museum style cape that just sits flat, like just here, and it's like, and I can't do it. Like, I like my figures to always, basically, I like to imagine that all of my figures are in a wind tunnel. So all of my figures, it's always like something blowing, the hair's going somewhere or another. I can't stand just like straight down. So and because of that, I'm just like even with the Bizarro, I mean, I could have just made his cape go straight down. It would have been so much easier. But I'm like, I wanted to have motion and feeling. I'm just like, I knew what I was in for. But so that's just something to keep in mind. Is yeah.
Would it be worth it to just include cloth capes?
Some people do. A lot of people do. Like, there's a lot of mixed media statues now, and they'll have wire inside the capes and stuff like that. So again, it all depends on what you like. A lot of guys like sculpted capes. They want it to look like a certain way. Some people they don't. They like the cloth or they want the cloth. So yeah, you can absolutely do it. At some point, I would say, tackle a cape. I mean, do a cape. I mean, I like the results. I'm always happy at the end with the results. It's just that, when I sit there, I've sent pictures to my friends. I'm covered in dust. It looks like I just went through like a dust storm. And I've got a shop vac that I'm holding between my legs, and the shop vac is just sucking up like a portion of the dust, but there's so much of it. And I've got a mask on, and it's just me just sanding, drilling, and then sanding, and just, But in the end, I look at it and I'll be like, all right, it's a cool cape, but it was just a lot of work.
Your hands, I just found a technique, if you're using armatures in your hands too, that with monster clay and Chabon, you can melt that down. Now, get your general form on your armature, and you can dip it in Chabon and the monster clay to give you a basic form, and then you can go over top of that and work your super sculpting.
Totally, and I do the same thing with wax sometimes, is that you just take like floral wire or something like that, you can just like dip it in wax. The other thing I've done sometimes, I'll take like with the wax, I'll take floral wire, and when it's heated up, I'll take a brush and I'll just brush it onto the thing and stuff like that. So there's definitely like easy ways to do it.
And capes, CX5, I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah, I've used it a lot.
Well, unfortunately, I just found out that Adam Newton's not going to make it anymore.
Oh, okay.
Because the other thing like that, but you can dip material in that, and then you can actually wait till it sets up and then you form the material.
Yeah, I know a lot of guys, it's one of those things where I abandoned CX5 because I wasn't getting, there were other materials that I liked more, and every time I tried, things about it just kept not working for me. So I eventually just said, okay, this isn't for me. So I know one of my really good friends loves it and uses it and does amazing stuff for Sideshow. I mean, he does, he's working for Sideshow, does great stuff, loves CX5, and every time we talk to each other, I'm just like, no thank you. So it's all about you just get used to whatever material you like, delving into. So, anybody else? Any other question?
Is there, do you have a general or a different process when you sculpt, let's say for Bizarro versus Hulk sculpt? I think I'm a little more difficult to sculpt bigger size statues, so I'm just wondering your process.
So difficult in what way? Like, what's difficult for you about the bigger size?
Well, I guess my patience first of all.
Yeah.
I'm actually going in and trying to define certain things.
Okay, so it's just so with like a big Hulk, you're just spending a lot more time because there's just more mass to work on and stuff like that. Sure, yeah, absolutely, I totally get it. So if I'm working on a big giant Hulk, it's like the cape. If somebody gives me a cape, I know in my mind what's ahead of me. With the Hulk, it's the same thing. If I'm doing a big Hulk, I know that that I'm going to be spending a lot more time. Like, one arm is going to take me a long time because it's just so big. And it is one of those things where you just kind of know this is going to take me a lot longer to do. And on a bigger piece, I think you have to step away from it a lot more than when you're on a smaller piece, because a bigger piece, it's so easy to get like if I'm doing an arm or something like that, you start putting in the muscles, you start building up the forms, and it's easy to have a bad silhouette. So I won't have it built up enough or something like that, or or the bicep. It'll look good, but the scale is just a little bit wrong. So with the bigger pieces, I'm constantly stepping back, and I'm doing like this, and I'm looking, and I'm kind of spinning around. I'm going okay, to make sure that the whole form is there on something big. So if you're working on, like you said, something smaller, it's kind of easier to just do this. You have to physically get up and move away from the big stuff. And then, yeah, it's, you've got more, you have to almost pack more detail in because, it's so much bigger that, you can't go simple. As simple as, you might go on a smaller piece. So yeah, it's just a lot more time, and just, you're using the same muscles. It's just, you're just kind of like doing it on that scale. But that's the one thing I would say for big pieces is you just have to keep stepping away, keep looking at it as a whole, and making sure that, once you've got the form, then you just kind of keep zeroing in. And during the class, the one thing I said for everything I found with sculpting, it's all about, for everything, going from big down to small. So do not jump right into the details. You need to go into form, and then slowly get more general forms, and then slowly work your way into the details. With the tools, the same thing. The tools, I tell everybody, start off with bigger tools, and then you start working your way down to smaller tools, make sure you got small tools. But it is about that process, and just like I said, I see more new people when they start a sculpt and they just start focusing on the details, and it's like they just skipped all these steps, and they step back and they've got a really detailed face, or the eyes are really detailed, or the hair's really detailed, and you step back, but the neck, there's no neck, and the shoulder are up here, and one arm is shorter than the other arm, and they're like, yeah, but look at the face, and you're like, yeah, but the rest of him's jacked up. It doesn't look like, that is, a horrible looking figure, but they're like, yeah, but I mean, I spent days on that face, and you're like, yeah, well, it doesn't save the rest of the sculpt. So, you've really got to do that step back and just make sure that, before you ever jump into details. Details are the last thing that you get into. And for the details, that's where you really need the right tools. So, don't try to put in details with the wrong kind of tool.
On something that massive, say for the whole, after you put your foil on, do you reinforce it with foil wire just to keep everything?
So we went over that in class. So the bigger the piece, when you got something like a Hulk, I had one of the people in the class brought in, after when the class was over, he brought in some statue that he had made, and it was in a bag in pieces. And for one, it was mostly Sculpey. And I was telling him, part of your problem is you didn't bulk this out with aluminum foil. It would have been half the weight. So it had crumbled off of his armature. And it was this big weightlifter dude, and he did exactly what I said don't do. He did, he focused, he made this nice looking anatomy, and he was showing me in pieces look at the chest and stuff, and it was just a chest with abs, but the rest of it had crumbled away. So I'm like, okay, well, your ab chest guy looks great, but his legs are gone, his arms are gone, there's, it's a Greek statue that's just fallen apart. But so he had, and I'd said, bulk out the internal part with foil, and and he kept saying, he kept kind of saying well, somebody else had told me to do that, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to argue with somebody else. I'm going to tell you what I know works for 15 years for me and stuff, is that number one, when you're making something big, you've got, your number one focus should be on making that internal structure really solid. It should be you should have something going in the back so that it's holding it, and that's where you can use plumbing pipe or something like that, or if you go smaller, there's threaded rods, and I've got, again, tutorials on that on the Patreon and stuff like that. I've got all different ways, and then I always make sure that my feet are sticking into the base with the wire, and I sometimes will secure it with Magic Sculpt or something, but basically my figure's got 3 points at least where it's holding it, and then it won't shift. And then for the body itself, I'll make sure the wire's there. What I generally do is I might make sure I might wrap it in wire, and then I'll start bulking it out with my foil. And for that big Hulk, I knew he had to be mostly foil, because even with a good structure, when I started adding clay, even though I'm just skinning it, it's still going to be heavy. And I don't want it to do what that guy's did. I don't want it to just, he wasn't even there when it crumbled. His structure was so bad on the inside, it was loose, and the clay just kind of fell off, and he didn't have anything really holding it together. So a lot of times what I'll do is on a bigger piece like that is, you always have to think, if I was making a Hulk, and the Hulk was this big, then my internal structure would maybe be my size. It would be about my size, because I know I'm going to be adding this. So I might make a foil piece that's as big as me, and then depending on what I want to do, I might skin it real thin with Super Sculpt or Magic Sculpt, which is epoxy putty, and that's the stuff I made the cape out of. So I might do, but I've got to make sure the pose is locked in, because once I skin it, it's locked in. You know, I mean, you can break it and make it move if you have to, but you don't want to have to do that. So you get the pose, you skin it with Magic Sculpt, and then on top of that, I'm going to brush the liquid Sculpey to help it stick to that, and then I'm just going to start building that up with my Sculpey. But that's the way to kind of like make your internal structure, you know, more solid and really so, because there's nothing worse than having a piece that you're working on and then all of a sudden, like when you get to a certain point, it starts slipping and you could feel that it no longer is really attached to your internal structure, and then you're kind of screwed. Then there's not really much you can do, and you're sort of like, you know, and it's going to keep shifting. And so at that point, you're almost better baking it, and then maybe if you have to, sand down parts and just add new Sculpey, but at least lock it in, because if it starts shifting around, it's going to do what that guy's did. You're going to be bringing it in a plastic bag to show me all the pieces. And so really focus on your internal structure, like your skeleton, and like making sure that it's, you know, it's really solid. And even if it's locked in, I will put, I'll put like a threaded rod in the back and stuff, and I'll wrap it in wire, but then I'll put Magic Sculpt around it so that it kind of holds it stiff. And then when the sculpt is done and baked, I'll just grab pliers, I'll grab the threaded rod, and I'll just crack it so that it breaks the bond of the Magic Sculpt and the statue. So you can just kind of break it that way. And then you can unscrew it once you've broken that little bond. But make sure it doesn't move, it doesn't shift, or things like that. So, okay. Last question? Anybody? Ring. Hello? Yeah? Uh-huh. Sir, I'm sorry, this is my friend Angela. Sorry.
When you do the anatomy, do you focus on the body parts in general, or do you kind of go from spot to spot? Do you focus on arms first, legs first, or do you just kind of go, you know, what you see in the direction?
Yeah, no, I generally look at the whole form. I'll look at like the entire thing, not just like one part. So you got to keep stepping back, like I said, and you got to look at it like a silhouette and sort of like really, like when you, like I said, when you step back, you want to kind of see the whole thing and make sure that proportionally it's all correct, and you're not working on any details yet. But if you focus too much on like the arm or the bicep or something like that, you're gonna miss, you know, the overall form, and you're just going to have a great looking bicep, and you're going to have like really weak legs or really weak chest or something like that. No.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Hey, tell Ava I said hi. Hi, Ava. Say bye. Okay. All right, anybody else? Anybody else? Any other questions? No? All right, well, thank you all for coming.